Welcome back, friends. So, while I do videos on the royal family and everything going on, because it is living history that we are living through right now, I have not forgotten our series on the Army of Northern Virginia. As I said, it will most definitely be a shorter series than the Army of North of the Potomac. We really only have two more event videos and one biography video left. But thank you all for staying with me. Again, we're currently living in a historical moment. The death of a queen and the ascension of King Charles III is extremely big news and has extremely large historical ramifications. But last time we talked, we were discussing the end of the Maryland campaign in 1862. Robert E. Lee is now settling his forces in as the winter is coming. Thomas Jackson and his Second Corps were settling in for the winter quarters in Winchester, Virginia, west of Washington, D.C. And the First Corps, under the command of James Longstreet, he and his force was sitting comfortably at Culpeper, south of the federal capital. The Union forces were sitting in between the two forces, numbering anywhere above 122,000 men. Now, the reason Lee was believing that no more fighting would happen before the spring was because it was common military etiquette to not fight during the winter, due to the harsh winters and not being able to move armies as easily. But the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, Ambrose Burnside, would attempt to make one hard strike. Now, Burnside believed he could make these movements unharassed because of Longstreet and Culpeper and Jackson and Winchester. He highly doubted Lee's speed. But Burnside did not believe that Lee would notice 122,000 men marching away from their positions. But Lee, of course, would find out because they were moving through Northern Virginia, which was Lee's home turf, and much of the population was giving them a heads up on the movements. Now, Union officers such as Winfield Scott Hancock realized this and begged General Burnside to ford the river and not wait to attack the position he targeted. Not give Lee the time to organize the attack. But Burnside denied his pleas, deciding they would cross the Rappahannock River and seize Fredericksburg, Virginia, and then march on Richmond with one of the largest forces ever seen on the North American continent. Lee, of course, already knew what was happening by his reports. 122,000 men were staging at Falmouth, Virginia, and near Lee's childhood home of Stafford Hall. The only possible direction of the attack was towards Fredericksburg, so they could use the Fredericksburg-Richmond line to move on Richmond. Lee ordered General Longstreet to abandon Culpeper with his corps and begin to take up positions on Maury's Heights north of the town of Fredericksburg, and install a small garrison in the town of Fredericksburg. An evacuation order was given by Lee that the town must be abandoned and civilians brought to the safety behind Maury's Heights. Now, much like other evacuations orders, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone listened. Heaven knows there were still people in Fredericksburg when the battle began. Then Lee ordered Jackson and his corps to move south and cap Longstreet's southern flank. Lee's plan was in fact to trap the Federal forces in a funnel of gunfire. Longstreet would have his left flank anchored on the northern end of the Rappahannock River, stretched across Maury's Heights. Then Jackson would continue the line, moving south of the heights and town. Then his flank would be capped on the river by Jeb Stuart's cavalry. All the Union generals could do was watch as Burnside refused to divert from his plan, approved by the Capitol. On December 11th, 1862, General William Barksdale and his Mississippi Brigade opened fire on the Union engineers building the pontoon bridge across the river. They would keep fire hot on the Federal troops, but General Lee needed his men alive. So Barksdale's orders were not an open fight through the town, just a delaying action. So what a delaying action is, for those who don't know, because again, I've checked my analytics, I get people from all walks of life, and not everyone knows what these military terms are. A delaying action is what you do to literally just give yourself that few moments. Whatever it takes, just, I need a minute. That's all I need. I need a minute. A delaying action is for that. So once Federal troops had successfully crossed the river, Barksdale and his men began to slowly withdraw through Fredericksburg. Union troops would form into their columns and advance into the town. But Confederates would be hiding behind alleys, wagons, and balconies, open firing into the vanguard of General Sumner's Grand Division. They would fire, then withdraw, then hide, fire, and withdraw. Every minute mattered to get civilians behind Maury's Heights while also shoring up his defenses on his new line. Now, the first day's fights were over. Fight-wise, the Union had taken the city, but Lee had the heights and only way out of the city towards Richmond. Burnside was now pulled into Lee's trap. He had two options: withdraw and not risk his grand army he now commanded, but also scrap the Washington-approved strategy, or commit to the attack and take the heights. The next day, Burnside withdrew his army against the Confederate positions. Only a brigade in the 2nd Union Corps would get 30 feet from Longstreet's position. A division commanded by George Meade would momentarily break through Jackson's position, but then very quickly be repulsed. After 2 days of fighting, on December 14th, the Union Army, defeated, began to retreat from the city, back across the Rappahannock. Union forces would have over 12,000 casualties, and the Confederate forces would have a little over 5,000 casualties. The Battle of Fredericksburg would go down as the Second Waterloo, the massacre on the heights of Maury's Heights. Now, the defeated Union forces and victorious Confederate forces would settle into winter quarters finally. Lee would spend it shoring up his positions, also enjoying the Virginia hospitality by local wealthy people who allowed his army to encamp on their properties. But at the Army of the Potomac headquarters, the new commander, Joseph Hooker, was planning his spring offensive. He would create a diversion at Fredericksburg, then have the rest of the army crush Lee's forces between Fredericksburg and a place called the Wilderness around Chancellorsville Crossing in northern Virginia. Lee met with his generals to discuss what there was to do. Longstreet was only at half strength, most of his corps being sent south to protect the southern Virginian border, whereas Jackson had his full corps. The Battle of Chancellorsville, beginning April 6, 1863, what General Longstreet had left began to engage with Hooker's army in this new campaign, the Chancellorsville campaign. Jackson would leave General Jubal Early facing off against Union near Fredericksburg, while the rest of his corps began a flanking maneuver into the Wilderness. The key to Lee's plan is that Jackson comes down as a hammer on the Union left flank, which was being held by the 11th Corps under Oliver Howard, so hard that they can cause the entire army to be thrown into chaos. On May 2nd, Jackson made his attack, slamming into Howard's unprepared 11th Corps. He routed the 11th Corps and then began to push towards the Union headquarters at Chancellorsville Crossing. Hooker in the coming days was attempting to restructure his positions, but the Confederates were crushing the Union forces, again and again pushing them against the river. But on the night of the 2nd, after reviewing his corps' push, General Jackson, returning to his lines, was shot by his own men of the 18th North Carolina. They had mistaken him for Federal cavalry because General Jackson was known to wear a dark gray overcoat that looked very similar to the ones that Union cavalry would wear. He'd be shot multiple times by his own men, getting his arm amputated because of it. After General Lee's defeat, Hooker on May 6, he would go on to say, when informed of Jackson's amputation, he has lost his left arm. I have lost my right. Jackson would die on May 10th, 4 days later, in Guinea Station, Virginia. Lee would then have to reorganize his army, being he believed he had no commander competent enough to lead a corps of Jackson's size. So he made a 3rd Corps, placing Richard Ewell in command of the new 2nd Corps, with the divisions of Jubal Early, Robert Rhodes, and Edward Allegheny Johnson. The new 3rd Corps will be commanded by General A.P. Hill, with the divisions of Richard Anderson, Henry Heath, and W. Dorsey Pender. Now, after discussions with General Lee and Jefferson Davis, Lee felt his army was undefeatable and could accomplish anything. So a new plan was made, and it was to invade the North a second time, crush the Army of the Potomac north of the capital, and impose peace on Washington, D.C. Especially because fears were coming from the West, with the Army of Tennessee slowly restricting the Confederacy's contact with the world. On June 3rd, 1863, Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia will invade the North. So we have a full series on what happened next, so I will leave all those in the description. Thanks for watching. We have one more video to go in the series, then a bio on Stonewall Jackson. Thanks for the support. Please like, share, and comment. And if we are a new viewer, please subscribe. Why not? Doesn't hurt. And you get to learn a lot of fun history. I try to have new content up every day. Obviously, with the Queen's death, I will be doing some more content than usual. Yesterday, I did a video on King George V. I'm also trying to make sure I do other things like music videos on songs from certain bands, as well as gameplay. I'm planning to have a gameplay up soon. But I have all this coming. Would love your subscription. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you real soon.